Do you remember how in the 1700s England moved into the world of modern politics, and how the monarchy and parliament seem to have finally found a way to live together in peace? Well, the end of this century is also the moment when Britain entered the modern economic world, and within 50 years it became the economic leader of the world, or as they said then, the workshop of the world. The Industrial Revolution, which began sometime around 1700, was actually the result of a long historical process. Its roots can be found in the scientific revolution, in the Enlightenment, and in free trade. In addition, England was rich in raw materials, especially coal, and it was coal that powered the key invention of the Industrial Revolution, the steam engine, as conceived by James Watt. This invention powered industrial machinery, boats, and of course trains. The locomotive which pulls the train is perhaps the most famous steam engine and is an emblem of the Industrial Revolution. Obviously, London was one of the first cities in the world to develop rail transport. After all, the tracks in some cases were already there, but instead of a locomotive pulling the cars, there were horses. This great upheaval also had its negative effect. The widening gap between the rich and the poor was the most evident downside of industrialization, and it was destined to worsen during the next century. The rich certainly became richer, while those who didn't own factories or lands were forced to do back-breaking work. They often lived in horrible areas of the cities called slums. For its part, the state did practically nothing as regards the economy, leaving everything in the hands of the new capitalists, the demigods of progress. The Industrial Revolution is just one of the small and large revolutions that shook the world in that period. In 1789, the French Revolution broke out. In America, after a brief and bloody war, the English colonies won independence in 1783. These were tempestuous years, which saw the end of a political and social model of strictly ordered hierarchies. This can also be seen in the works of art of this period, which were part of the Romantic movement. These works were revolutionary because they went against the then dominant rationalist spirit of the Enlightenment. Wordsworth's poem praised the simple life in direct contact with nature, his most common theme, as opposed to the new industrialized ugliness of the cities. Coleridge, Keats, Shelley and Byron celebrate a sensual and imaginative life, and they sing of the beauty of nature. These poets wanted a life of intense emotions, and they wanted freedom. In short, they understood that the world was changing and that the new culture brought by economic progress was about to overturn the ways of the world. They were right, naturally.
After you have watched this video about Romantic age, just an introduction, please do the exercises number 1 and 2. In exercise number 3, just express your opinion, because at the end it says work in pairs and share your opinions. It doesn't matter, just write your own opinions. Then we hope to discuss them. We will be back to school. Thank you very much. Now let's have a quick look at the literary context of the Romantic movement. The cultural trends which characterized Europe in the years between the French Revolution and the middle of the 19th century brought significant changes in taste and attitude, and became known as the Romantic movement. Romantic comes from the French roman, that means tale. For the time, it was used in England to indicate the fantastic and irrational events present in all the romantics, but it soon began to be used in connection with feelings, emotions, and state of mind, like melancholy. Okay, you can have a look here. The Romanticism was born in Germany. It's not an English movement. It was the Sturm und Drang movement. The most important literary person representing this movement are Goethe and Schiller. And those two people were very important now. The Sturm und Drang poets, the German poets, exalted the freedom, the individual, the creativity, and they saw the nature as a sacred and influencing force. Their concept, here it is, of nature as the expression of a divine plan was based on the theorist of Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Jean-Jacques Rousseau was a philosopher, a French one, who said the man was born free. But now he is in chain, so we have to be free now. In English literature, history, the Romantic period is said the extant form in 1798 when Wordsworth and Coleridge published their lyrical ballads, an important work of poetry work, okay? And they were really revolutionary. Why? Because they both subject matter and form of poetry changed radically. The poets advocated the creative originality and aimed to move poetry towards the language of everyday speech, and the nature world was the domain subject, the dominant one, okay? Another thing that was really important, it was the return to nature, okay? The impact of the Industrial Revolution, okay, was really, really big. It was enormous, it says. And the result of this was a return to nature, not a center of beauty sites, but to seem to be consoling or morally uplifting the man, okay? Because it's a kind of solution of the problem's nature. Most romantic poems are based on the natural environment and the English countryside and the contemplation of nature. This was the most important. They were the most important. The cognitive power of the imagination and the role of the poet. The aspiration to transcend reality was one of the main features of the Romantic movement, and feelings and the imagination, previously discredited by rationalists, became of the utmost importance to the Romantic poets. And in the search for spiritual truth, the poet, played a very important role. They clarify the imagination of his reader, and in the way the figure of the poet became the guide, the seer, and the prophet. And one important thing was the solitary, okay? The Romantic writers looked inwards, inside themselves, to their own soul, and gave the great value to individual consciousness. They exalted the unusual, the strange, and revered the outcast and the rebel. The Romantic poetry often presents the figure of the solitary. The poet is alone. Okay, here it is. And they wanted to escape from reality. That was a Romantic poet wants to do. So the Romantics tried to escape from reality, which appeared too rational and materialistic. They looked back at the Middle Ages because they looked for their. They tried to recreate a less sophisticated but simpler world when the nature was in the life of these medieval people, okay? and they wanted to escape also from the fascination and the mystery of exotic places, because they wanted to go there and discover new places where to live or find inspiration. Now let's talk about romantic poetry. Romanticism was a gradual process. It was not just an immediate one. And there were two really important generations of romantic poets. The first one is the generation of Wordsworth and Coleridge. And the second one is the generation represented by Byron, Shelley, and Keats. Blake is another poet, but it has got another role in this situation. And Wordsworth and Coleridge are also called the Lake poets because they used to live in this district in England. They wrote the lyrical ballads, and 19 of these poems were written by Wordsworth, and only 4 by Coleridge. In his poems, Wordsworth made poetry out of the incidents of simple juristic life. He tried to use a language that was really simple, near to nature, similar to the ordinary speech of the people. And Coleridge insisted on poetry, employed poetry to give credibility to the fantastic and the supernatural. Okay, the second generation was with Byron and Shelley, and they didn't use that simple way of expressing their feelings. They used a more rebellious spirit, a passionate defense of freedom, and Keats was mainly concerned with beauty. And from the literary point of view, many features in common were between the two different generations of romantic people, from the first and the second generation. All the generations of romantic poets underlined the cognitive power of the imagination and individualism and aspiration to the infinite. But the second generation was more complex and used a richer, they used to use a richer language in their works. That's all for now. Let's have let's study those parts of romantic poets because it's just an introduction to this period of poetry.